How's it going, guys? It is Glake from the Avid Entries slash the Phantom Pages.com, finally bringing you guys yet another reading at long last. I've been fighting a cold over the past it's been a little bit more than a week, to be very honest, and on top of that, getting settled into my new work situation. So a lot has been going on lately. It's been quite chaotic. I want to say the first 3 or so weeks of March, and then on top of that, getting sick at the tail end has put a damper into my video schedule and everything that I've been trying to do going into spring sort of here with this channel. But finally, I'm back with a reading. We're going to pick up off on the book that I said my next video was going to be in the last video, which is More Completion Process by Teal Swan. We've got a pretty lengthy chapter today. We're on chapter 3, and this is a pretty long one, but it is covering a topic that has been on my mind lately when it comes to relating to the subconscious. And yeah, I've been kind of digging into some stuff here and there regarding that. So I am very curious to see what is said in this chapter, and we're just going to leap right into it because it is a lengthy one. So sit back, hang tight. I will highlight anything that sticks out to me that I want to cover in this chapter, but I think that since this is such a long one, I might not do any like recap at the end because it's a very long chapter, but we'll see. I'll have my highlighter ready just in case, and we can go from there. So here we go. Chapter 3, Making the Subconscious Conscious. It's widely known that the behavioral programming in the subconscious mind is acquired during the formative period between gestation and 8 years of age. These life-shaping subconscious programs are the result of observing and interacting with our primary attachment figures in childhood, namely our parents, siblings, teachers, community, and culture. Regretfully, many of the perceptions acquired about ourselves in this formative period are expressed as limiting and self-sabotaging beliefs. But the way we felt during those formative experiences had an even greater effect on us. How early childhood emotions tether us to the past. When we were young and our minds were not fully developed, we didn't think about the world as much as we felt the world. We felt the world before we saw the world. We felt the world before we could even conceptualize that we live in a world. You came to this earth for the purpose of your own expansion. You knew that doing this would guarantee expansion for the collective as well. You adopted the consciousness level of your parents upon coming into this life, so that you could become the progression of their consciousness and, by extension, your entire line of ancestry. This is one of the reasons our own cognitive brain function does not develop until we are about 8 years old. We spend our earliest years, those before the age of 8, essentially downloading what beliefs and experiences we can from our family and culture. During those years, the way we feel is primarily reactive. This means we can't think or rationalize our way out of the painful emotions we feel. And if our traumas remain unresolved, they become wounds that last into adulthood. Reflections of ourselves. Once your cognitive mind is developed, you can rationalize your way into thinking whatever makes sense to you. If you were able to rationalize why your father left when you were 4 years old, you wouldn't feel so badly about it. So, if we had the ability to think our way out of feeling, we would never have downloaded from our primary caregivers any issues that would need to be resolved. But the fact that we become capable of rationalizing at about age 8 has serious implications. It means that we don't experience any new emotional traumas after about age 8. Okay, interesting. This may make no sense to you. After all, you probably suffered heartache from breaking up with a first love in your teens or 20s, or maybe you felt the immense pain of losing your husband when you were 40. Am I really telling you that the pain you felt from age 8 until now wasn't real or that it wasn't traumatic? No. What I am telling you is that the trauma you experience as a result of losing your husband was in fact just a reflection of a of a prior wound. So, when we consider the example of the kind of intense feelings a woman might feel from the loss of her husband today, we may find that when she was 4 years old, her father left the family. Then we could see that the emotions associated with the loss of her husband are in fact a reflection of the loss of her father in childhood. The loss of her father was an unhealed wound that has manifested itself in the form of the loss of her husband. Her being still hopes to integrate the old unhealed wound. This is an example that clearly shows why we need to start the completion process with the mantra that if anything hurts when pressed, it's because there was already a wound there. This does not mean that you cannot suffer trauma in your adult life. I'm just putting words there. It simply means that the trauma you are experiencing in your adult life often links to an even deeper causal origin. The completion process will work to resolve trauma within your being no matter what age you were when that trauma occurred. For example, it will work to resolve the post-traumatic stress that a veteran is experiencing as a result of returning home from war. But what we often find while working with the trauma that we think caused our current distress is that the real trauma is in fact deeper. We discover that the trauma we think caused our distress is just a reflection of an earlier trauma. For example, the powerless feeling of being in the line of fire in a war zone could be a reflection of the powerless feeling the soldier has as a child, metaphorically being caught in the line of fire between his parents when they were divorcing. If this is a hard concept to accept, I ask you to suspend judgment for a time and simply try out this process. Let the direct experience of the completion process make up your mind. As we commence with this process, I want you to think of your uncomfortable emotions today as ropes that link your current self to your traumatic memories. When you have a strong emotional reaction to something today, the strong reaction means that your past trauma has been triggered and wants to be integrated. We can then use the emotion that is surfacing in real time to find the aspect of yourself that has been rejected and therefore suppressed, whether it's a personality trait, a belief, a memory, or a feeling. By finding it and feeling it, you integrate it back into your present awareness and thus become whole again. This is the underlying premise of the completion process. Inner child work. When we become adults, when we become adults, we think that our childhood has ended, but it hasn't. Our child self remains alive within us. Its perceptions and beliefs affect the way we think, feel, and act today. When we encountered things in our childhood that were painful, we were stuck in that pain with no knowledge of how to assimilate or heal it. The totality of who we were at that point in time could not move forward. That's how old thoughts, feelings, and experiences froze into our being. Many of us survive and function day to day by ignoring the pain. In some cases, the feelings become so painful that in order to function at all, you rejected the part of yourself that first experienced that particular pain. In essence, as children, we buried our own inner selves. It was a coping mechanism that served us well at the time, but stifling that pain can kill us in the end. The pain we hang on to can only be healed and assimilated when we are willing and brave enough to turn our attention back toward the child who is frozen in time. We need to listen to what that child has to say and love our inner child in the same way he or she needed to be loved back then. Each and every one of us, regardless of how loving or unloving our upbringing was, holds within ourselves the essence of the children we once were. One part of us grew up, but the other part stayed a child. This inner child is the symbol of our emotional selves. The adult part of you grew up, despite not getting what it needed as a child. It's your adult self who holds the key to healing. We will always be emotional orphans if we wait for someone else to lovingly parent the underdeveloped parts of ourselves. We will always be powerless if we wait for someone else to rescue the part of us that needs to be rescued. And we will always be unhealed if we wait for someone else to take care of the parts of us that need to be cared for. The best way to begin facilitating your own healing is to consciously take care of the child self that is present within you. You need to provide for yourself today whatever you didn't receive in the past from others. Inner child work has been a foundation of self-help and psychology for many years. It's one of the most life-transforming techniques, but unknowingly, we have been missing a few crucial components in this technique. The completion process takes inner child work to the next level and reveals that it is much more than a quaint self-help technique. How the human shadow works. What is the human shadow? Let me share a basic explanation. You probably already know about your ego, which is your self-concept. Your ego, this is very important for a lot of people. Your ego is the part of the internal you that forms as a kind of separate identity. When you first come into this life, your ego is not yet fully formed, but as you grow up and gradually mature, your ego is formed through your relationship to others. Therefore, the majority of your ego develops during the process of socialization. While you are being socialized within your family and your community, you learn the concepts of good and bad, right and wrong, acceptable and unacceptable. Most importantly, you learn about the aspects of yourself that are acceptable and unacceptable. It becomes clear to even young children that love and reward will come in response to what is acceptable, and that abandonment, I don't know why I can't say that right now, abandonment or punishment arises in response to what is unacceptable. As we covered in an earlier chapter, people naturally develop a survival strategy, rejecting and therefore suppressing what we think is unacceptable about ourselves and causing a split in our consciousness. In essence, we divide ourselves. This is how the real substance of the subconscious mind is born. We could call the subconscious the shadow because we can't see it clearly and thus are not aware of it. In the same vein, we could call our conscious side the light because we can see it clearly and we are aware of what is conscious in our lives. The completion process is a shadow work process because it's a process that involves the aspect of ourselves that we are not conscious of. Therefore, sort of in the dark. Living with internal separation and division is not a natural state for humans. It's actually an unhealed state because the shadow aspect of our inner self strives to be integrated. Regardless of how much we wish that it would just go away, our shadow rears its head whenever something in our subconscious is brought into our awareness by circumstances in our life. So if our partner doesn't show up on time, this triggers a deeply suppressed feeling of abandonment. I don't know why I can't say the word abandonment. I don't know what's wrong with me. That we weren't even aware of. It's quite possible that we could spend the next 45 minutes flipping out in what seems like a massive overreaction. But as you learned in the last chapter, it's not drama, it's your true inner feelings. To work with the human shadow is to make the unconscious conscious and make the unacceptable acceptable. The integration of your unconsciousness leads to complete and total awareness. It sounds great, and I believe it is a very powerful technique. But while exploration of the human shadow is popular with some spiritual teachers, psychologists, and life coaches, this technique is very unpopular with others. Even channels and spiritual guides disagree on the subject of the human shadow, so I will give you my point of view. Can working with the human shadow work against you? Can working with the human shadow work against you? You may have heard two specific arguments against working with the human shadow. The first is, if you focus on your shadow, all you will get is more shadow. The second one is, if you focus on needing to clear yourself of your shadow, all there will be is more shadow to clear. In my opinion, these two arguments come from a limited and elementary understanding of consciousness, resistance, and the law of attraction. If it were true that positive focus creates a purely positive person, then any person who is petting a puppy or focusing positively on positively and consistently would have a pure energy field around him that is completely clear of any wounds. But this is not the case. Being born extrasensory, I have always been able to actually see energy fields around the people I meet. In truth, each human body is, at its core, an energy field. When I'm observing someone's energy field, which is sometimes called an aura, and that person is focused on something positive, such as petting a puppy, parts of the person's energy field become lighter. It's as if they are allowing more energy in, while other parts of their energy field remain dark or cloudy. The dark parts that appear in a human energy field are caused by aura tears, rips, or imprints from unhealed trauma, and these are especially prevalent in the emotional body field. No matter how positive someone's focus is, if their subconscious contains trauma imprints, those aspects don't just go away with a warm and fuzzy experience or by thinking happy thoughts. When we experience something traumatic on an emotional level, it works the same way as it does with a physical trauma. To use an extreme example, if you are the average person involved in a head-on collision and you end up with a compound fracture, no amount of purely positive focus is going to fuse your bone back together again. If you focus positively, chances are that your positive focus will simply lead you directly to a doctor who can put the bone back together again. It's not a comfortable procedure to have a bone reset. It's a process that demands you to admit the bone is broken. Have someone set the bone and put a cast on it, and then focus deliberately on creating the healing state of that particular ailment. Consider another scenario. What if you have a compound fracture and you attempt to distract yourself from the fracture by just thinking positive thoughts? You are then in a mental and emotional tug of war between the aspect of yourself that has awareness that this is a serious issue that needs conscious attention, and another aspect of yourself that doesn't want to admit that this is a serious issue that needs conscious attention. What would cause you to decide that the best thing to do is focus positively when you clearly have a compound fracture that needs medical attention? The answer is to avoid something. What I'm trying to get at here is that there is an enormous difference between focusing on something positive for the sake of manifesting a positive focus and focusing on something positive for the sake of trying to escape from, ignore, or get away from something negative. Consider this honestly. What is the result of trying to escape from, ignore, or get away from our compound fracture? It festers. If we survive at all, we are incapacitated. In short, when we try to avoid something unpleasant or painful, the thing we are trying to avoid gets worse. And remember, the things we are trying to avoid are the essence of the human shadow. We've just talked about an example from your physical body, but it's the exact same scenario that we face on an emotional level. If we suffered from an emotional trauma and we reject and therefore suppress it in favor of keeping a positive focus, we are using positivity to get away from negativity. The emotional wound doesn't actually get any better. It festers. However, if you do focus positively, chances are that your positive focus will lead you to someone who can help you heal and ultimately integrate your emotional wounds. I believe that if you find yourself resistant to the idea of working with the shadow, you are trying to avoid something. And when you realize that you're using positive focus to avoid something negative, it's time to release that resistance to whatever it is you're trying to avoid. To release resistance to something, you have to turn in the direction of it instead of away from it, because turning away from it just reinforces your resistance to it. Let me get another quick sip. Attracting lemons into your life. When I say don't think about lemons, you start to think about lemons. And this is what you're doing on a subconscious level by trying to use positive focus to avoid negative emotions. You're basically saying whatever you do, don't focus on the way you actually feel. Trying not to think about the negative emotion only serves to magnify the way you actually feel until the reflection is so big you can't possibly escape it. It manifests itself in more and more aggressive ways, hoping that you will come to terms with it and eventually release your resistance to it. So you are already in resistance to your shadow aspect, and this resistance is why the negative emotions settled in the subconscious in the first place. So, what should you do when you are in resistance to something? You should try to release resistance to that specific thing. We know that it doesn't work to obsessively focus positively on it or to try to ignore it, because that just makes us resist it further. In our sincere effort to avoid it, we are in essence focusing on it and sending it energy without even being aware that we are doing so. The most common turn of events when we repeatedly ignore or deny what is real for us, but that is unwanted by us, is that it manifests in our body as an illness or another physical condition that we can't ignore. It's interesting to note that we not only reject and therefore suppress unacceptable bad things into our subconscious, but we also suppress unacceptable good things. This is what idolization is about. Idolization is nothing more than the projection of the suppressed positive attributes of one person onto another person. Idolization, right? Yeah. So you may admire the reflection you see instead of the source, which is yourself. Seeking awareness. When it comes to suppressed aspects of our being, the first step in shifting from a lower vibration to a higher vibration is becoming aware. When we are dealing with something we are not consciously aware of, becoming aware is always the first step toward vibrational growth. Becoming aware is like the first time you shine light into a dark closet to see what's there. Awareness in and of itself generates immense relief. We fear our shadow, and that is why we initially resist it. But by becoming aware of it, we come to understand it. Understanding our shadow is the most effective way to diminish fear, which allows us to feel more grounded and authentic. Positive focus does work, but there is one major exception. Positive focus works on everything except for the things you're trying to avoid. Another way of saying this is that positive focus works every time except when it's used as a tool to enable our resistance. I should probably highlight that, but I think that's pretty clear. Another way of saying this is that positive focus works every time except when it is used as a tool to enable our resistance. So, positive bypassing, I guess. Many of us are excited to discover the power of positive focus because it seems like a get out of jail free card. It seems like a magic pill that allows us to escape and avoid all our unwanted aspects. Unfortunately, because of an incomplete understanding of the law of attraction, many teachers reinforce the idea that all it takes to create a perfect life is perfect positive focus. However, consider this. If we have big things we are trying to avoid, like it or not, and conscious or not, a large part of our consciousness is going to be focused on past traumas. We're like emotional cripples who, on one level, know we are really hurt, but on another level, don't want to admit it. We'd rather believe that if our focus is positive enough, we will miraculously be put back together again. Here's the flaw in that thinking. The law of attraction, which is the governing law in our universe, is essentially the law of mirroring. The law of attraction states that whatever vibrations are contained within you are being matched exactly by experiences in your external world. And as we have already discussed, like it or not, your shadow aspects are vibrations within you that are attracting experiences into your life to match them. For this to stop happening, the shadows within you must be integrated and healed in order to cease being points of attraction. When talking about the law of attraction, I often use the analogy of the radio dial. Whatever station your dial is turned to dictates what signal and therefore what radio station you will receive. On an emotional level, this means if you are tuned to joy, you receive joy. But this analogy only works if you see yourself in your entirety as one dial. In reality, you are more like a switchboard made up of a multitude of dials. The various frequencies that are being received by all these different dials make up your overall vibration. You have a dial relative to every subject in your life. Looking at it this way, my dial relative to relationships could be set on despair, and so I receive relationships that lead only to heartbreak. Simultaneously, my career dial could be set to elation. So I receive career opportunities that make me feel elated, and I love my job. If you improve the frequency of the dial, if you improve the frequency of the signal being received by just one of these dials, your overall vibration increases. But to say that positive focus in any one area of your life will cause will cause positive improvement in all areas of your life is not accurate. Regardless of how much you positively focus on your career, on your friends, or on your body, you can still have a terrible vibration about romantic relationships, and so you will still experience negativity in your romantic life. You might start to think that positive focus doesn't work, but as I have just described, that's not the full story. Working on your shadow helps you let go. Now let me explain the second most common misconception about working with the human shadow, and the reason many people are discouraged from doing it. It's based on the idea that if they focus on their shadow, that focus will create more of the same. Thus there will always be more shadow and more work to do on their shadow. This is not accurate, and here's why. If we acknowledge that a person is made of universal energy in a state of wholeness when she comes into this life, you can imagine that this pure energy is a light much like our sun. Interesting. That is a whole nother debate altogether in terms of, it's a whole nother debate, but I will keep on going. Throughout this person's life, as she develops and experiences traumas, she doesn't gain darkness. The light within her doesn't go away, but rather her light is obscured. So when you work with your shadow, you will notice that it is as if you have wiped a dusty film off of a window. You don't need to work at creating more light, because once the dusty film is wiped off the window, light will stream into the room. You have removed what was obscuring the light. Alternatively, you could view your subconscious aspects as anchors that are holding you underwater. If you turned in the direction of the anchor and unhooked yourself from it, you wouldn't need to swim toward the surface. You would naturally float upward. This is what your vibration does when you do shadow work. This is what your vibration does. This is what your vibration does when you do shadow work. It acts as a buoy, naturally increasing your vibration, because the things that were decreasing it reintegrated, and there is no longer anything to weigh down your vibration. When you understand this concept, you will see that it's a myth to say that if you focus on the shadow, there will always be more shadow and more work to do on your shadow. That would be like saying if you stand at the sink and begin to wash dishes, there will always be more dishes to wash, as if a new one will pop up in your sink the second you finish cleaning the last one. Dealing with emotions, dealing with a rush of emotions. People have dedicated some aspect of their personal practice to exploring their shadow know from experience that over time, less and less work on their shadow has to be done because they become more and more integrated. But I can see why some people are confused and might think the opposite. I believe this is because a great many of the people who are against working on the human shadow have experienced what I call an emotional healing crisis or a catharsis. Catharsis, yeah. When they give themselves permission to open the closet to their subconscious comes rushing out. If you're experiencing an emotional healing crisis, it's tempting to think that your life has gotten worse since you started exploring your shadow. But this is a purge, and ironically, this is the point that most people stop working on their shadow and turn back toward where they came from. They are passing through the eye of the storm. If they would just keep going instead of turning back, they would reintegrate those aspects and quite likely attain an enlightened experience. They would feel freedom, wholeness, and peace for the very first time. This is what I want for you, for everyone who is ready to be whole again. So now you can see why it's important to turn around and face your fears. When you face your fears, they no longer hold power over you. You are no longer resisting the unwanted by running away from it. Instead, you are shifting into a state of allowance and acceptance. By doing this, the old aspects of self, which were based on old traumas, can't hurt you or haunt you anymore. Like a ghost, your shadow will follow you to the ends of the earth, begging for the light of consciousness to turn toward it. No amount, no amount of positive focus will make it disappear. Long story short, focusing on the shadow doesn't create more shadow, because shadow that is exposed to the light of consciousness ceases to be a shadow. Now that you understand why I feel so strongly that inner child work and exploration of the human shadow are important to this process, there are just a few more concepts to review before we proceed to the completion process. Specifically, I will explain how your physical body, your feeling body, and the concept of time relate to our lives and to the process of reintegration. All right, and that does it for chapter 3. So yeah, a very interesting one for sure on the subconscious, and sort of diving into some shadow work topics. Honestly, I will not really go over too much regarding that. I don't think it's really worth going over, because I have done a full reading on this channel for Teal's book Shadows Before Dawn, which for the most part is a shadow work based book. It's her book that's sort of focused on shadow work, and the completion process is kind of like Shadow Work Plus, in a sense, or it's like Shadow Work DLC. Is that a good way to describe it for all the nerds out there? It's just basically sort of like a addition to shadow work, and it's kind of her own spin on it, because as she stated in this chapter, shadow work is basically essentially inner child work, and that's pretty widely known among the self-help, psychology sort of community. However, the completion process is sort of her own thing, or her own spin on things, and that's kind of where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty after after this next chapter. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I'm not going to really go over anything, because a lot of it is just basically touching on shadow work and some of the subconscious stuff, which is very heavily explored in material that I've already read here on this channel. And that was a long chapter to begin with, so I'm well over half an hour on here already, so we're gonna call it here. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this reading. If you did, make sure you drop a like on the video. If you have anything to say about the reading, any comments, anything that stuck out to you, feel free to comment that below, and I'll check it out and I'll respond to it. And yeah, stay tuned very soon. Hopefully tomorrow I will have time to squeeze in a chapter of the Kybalion. That should be the next reading up on the channel, because still I want to alternate back and forth each day between both books until we're finished. And yeah, also just stay tuned for some new material, some new stuff coming very soon. I am in the very early stages of finally working on a video that is going to sort of spin into a whole new series of videos, and it's going to be sort of the first video sort of following that format, or I guess the first series of videos to follow that kind of format. And I'm going to be working on the script, I guess you could say, for it, probably sometime tonight. So in the very early stages of it, I have a lot of digging and research and just writing to do overall, so I can have it sort of be organized. But yeah, just letting you guys know that there is more stuff on the way, so stay tuned for that. And thank you for watching. Thank you for your energy, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.